They laughed at my 15-year-old suit. My wife told guests I was retired on disability. My daughter mocked me at her own wedding. Then someone noticed my tie clip. His face went white. Within minutes, whispers spread through the ballroom like wildfire. My phone started buzzing with names I hadn't heard in years. My wife demanded answers. She wouldn't like what she found. My name is William Harrison, though most people call me Bill. I'm 54 years old, and I've been married to Victoria for 31 years. We have 4 kids. Ashley, who just turned 29, Benjamin at 26, Sophie at 23, and Michael, our youngest at 15. On paper, we look like the American dream. Big house in Greenwich, Connecticut. Kids in good schools. Victoria on the board of 2 charitable foundations. Me? Well, that's where it gets complicated. The photographer hadn't even adjusted his lens when Victoria hissed it across the reception hall. Couldn't you have worn something more appropriate? Her voice had that sugar-coated acid she reserved for public humiliation. She gestured vaguely at my navy suit, the one I'd had tailored in Geneva back in 2009. It still fit perfectly, still looked sharp. But to her, it might as well have been a burlap sack. I didn't respond. Learned that trick years ago. Give her silence, and she moves on to the next target. Sure enough, her attention shifted to the orchid arrangements, complaining they weren't the exact shade she'd specified. I stood there, hands in my pockets, watching our daughter Ashley hold court near the champagne fountain. She'd inherited her mother's talent for commanding attention, and her talent for casual cruelty. Dad's still wearing that old thing? Ashley had said to her bridesmaids earlier, loud enough for me to hear. They'd giggled, stealing glances my way. At least he showed up sober this time. That one stung more than Victoria's comments. I'd never had a drinking problem, but Ashley had crafted her own narrative about me over the years, one where I was the disappointing father who couldn't quite measure up to her friends' successful dads. The men who drove Ferraris and talked loudly about their portfolios at country club brunches. I drifted toward the back of the ballroom, content to fade into the wallpaper. That's when I noticed him. The groom's father, Richard Thornton. His eyes weren't on the bride or the elaborate ice sculpture. They were locked on my throat, specifically on my tie clip. His wine glass stopped halfway to his lips. His face went from flushed to pale in the span of a heartbeat. He leaned toward his son, grabbed his elbow, and pulled him away from conversation with the wedding planner. I couldn't hear what he said, but I saw his hand trembling as he pointed in my direction. The tie clip wasn't much to look at. Simple platinum, understated design. But it had an engraving on the back, a code that only 12 people in the world were authorized to wear. I was one of them. And apparently, Richard Thornton knew exactly what it meant. He started walking toward me, his son following with a confused expression. Victoria didn't notice. She was too busy air-kissing some cousin in borrowed Chanel, her laugh echoing off the vaulted ceiling. She had no idea that everything she'd built, every assumption she'd made about who I was and what I was worth, was about to collapse. I adjusted my tie clip and waited. Some storms you can't outrun. You just stand still and let them break around you. Richard Thornton didn't approach me directly. That would have been too obvious, too desperate. Instead, he positioned himself near the champagne fountain, close enough to observe but far enough to maintain plausible deniability. His son, the groom, kept glancing between his father and me, clearly confused about what had triggered this sudden shift in behavior. I stayed where I was, near the back wall, watching the reception unfold like a stage play where I already knew the ending. Victoria was holding court near the head table, her laugh too loud, her gestures too animated. She loved being the center of attention at these events, loved the way people gravitated toward her energy. What she didn't love was me standing nearby, a reminder that not everything in her life sparkled. Bill. Benjamin appeared at my elbow, my middle son, the only one of my 4 kids who'd inherited my ability to read a room. He worked at Sterling Financial in Manhattan, entry-level analyst position, grinding 80-hour weeks for a salary that barely covered his studio apartment in Queens. You okay? You look like you're watching a chess match. I smiled at that. Benjamin had always been perceptive. Just taking it all in, I told him, "Your sister looks beautiful." "She does," Benjamin agreed, but his tone carried an edge. "She also spent 10 minutes complaining about your suit to Mom's friends. Thought you should know." That didn't surprise me. Ashley had learned early that aligning with Victoria meant easier access to the credit cards and social connections. Benjamin, on the other hand, had always been different. He asked questions. He noticed things, like the fact that I received calls at odd hours, or that certain letters arrived with diplomatic seals that I'd quietly file away. "I appreciate you telling me," I said, and I meant it. Benjamin hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Dad, who are you really? I mean, I know you say you did consulting work, but that's vague as hell. And I've seen some of the mail that comes to the house. That's not normal retirement correspondence." Before I could answer, Richard Thornton made his move. He walked past us, paused, and turned as if he'd just noticed me standing there. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Richard Thornton, father of the groom." I shook his hand. His grip was firm, but his palm was sweating. "Bill Harrison," I replied, "father of the bride." His eyes flicked down on my tie clip again, then back up to my face. "That's an interesting piece," he said, the words coming out too casual, too forced. "Family heirloom?" "Something like that," I said. The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt longer. Richard's jaw tightened. He knew I wasn't going to elaborate. He also knew that asking more questions in a public setting would reveal too much about what he already understood. "Well," he finally said, "I hope you're enjoying the evening." "Beautiful ceremony." It was, I agreed, and watched him walk away, his shoulders tense, his gait stiff. Benjamin stared at me with an expression somewhere between confusion and fascination. "What the hell was that about?" my son asked. I didn't answer. Across the room, I saw Richard lean close to another man in an expensive suit, whispering urgently. The other man's eyes widened, and then both of them turned to look at me. The whisper had started, and once it started, it wouldn't stop. Victoria was still laughing near the head table, completely unaware that the foundation of her carefully constructed world was beginning to shift beneath her feet. Dinner was served with the kind of precision that only expensive caterers can manage. Perfectly seared filet mignon, roasted vegetables arranged like art, wine that cost more per bottle than most people's car payments. I sat at the family table, Victoria to my left, Benjamin to my right. Ashley and her new husband occupied the center seats, glowing under the spotlight that followed them everywhere. Victoria hadn't spoken to me since her earlier comment about my suit. She was too busy networking, leaning across the table to compliment the mother of the groom on her Valentino dress. Sophie, my youngest daughter, sat 3 seats down, barely acknowledging my presence. She brought her boyfriend, some senator's son from Virginia, who kept checking his phone under the table. Michael, my 15-year-old, was at the kids' table in the back, probably wishing he was anywhere else. The clinking of a glass brought the room to attention. Richard Thornton stood, microphone in hand, his expression carefully composed. The father of the groom's speech, a tradition as old as weddings themselves. I expected the usual platitudes about love and family and new beginnings. What I got was something else entirely. Before I say anything else, Richard began, his voice steady but his knuckles white around the microphone. "I want to thank everyone for being here today. This is a celebration of family. And sometimes, we're lucky enough to marry into families that remind us what true excellence looks like." The room murmured politely. Victoria straightened in her chair, no doubt assuming he was about to praise Ashley. But Richard's eyes weren't on the bride. They were on me. "I once had the privilege," he continued, turning his body slightly in my direction, "of witnessing a man take a situation that seemed impossible and turn it into a triumph. My firm was on the brink of collapse in 2011. We'd over-leveraged on European bonds, and the Greek debt crisis was about to bury us. Our board was in panic mode, and then someone made a single phone call. My jaw tightened. Benjamin shifted beside me, his attention laser-focused on Richard's words. Across the table, Victoria's smile had frozen, her champagne glass suspended halfway to her lips. "That phone call," Richard said, his voice gaining strength, "led to a meeting in Zurich. And at that meeting, a consultant whose name I was told not to repeat gave us a strategy that saved not just my firm, but 3 others in our portfolio. He didn't ask for recognition. He didn't ask for payment beyond his standard fee. He simply did the work and disappeared." The room had gone completely silent. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. Richard raised his glass, and the gesture felt like a verdict being handed down. I didn't know he was here tonight until I saw his tie clip, but I'm grateful he is. To excellence, to quiet strength, and to the man who taught me that real power doesn't need to announce itself. He looked directly at me, and 300 people followed his gaze. Victoria's champagne glass hit the table with a sharp clink. Her face had gone pale, then flushed, cycling through emotions too quickly to name. Ashley's mouth was literally hanging open, her perfectly applied lipstick suddenly looking garish under the lights. Sophie had stopped texting her boyfriend. Even Michael, back at the kids' table, was staring at me with wide eyes. Benjamin leaned close and whispered, "Dad, what the hell is happening?" I didn't answer. I simply raised my water glass in acknowledgement, a minimal gesture that somehow felt louder than any speech I could have given. Richard nodded back, a small movement that carried the weight of mutual understanding, and sat down. The applause that followed wasn't enthusiastic. It was confused, uncertain, the kind of noise people make when they don't understand what just happened but know something significant has occurred. Victoria turned to me, her eyes demanding answers, but I kept my gaze forward, because this was just the beginning. The whisper had become a declaration, and there was no walking it back now. The reception continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. People who'd barely glanced at me all evening were now stealing looks, their conversations punctuated by glances in my direction. I watched it happen in real time, the recalibration of social hierarchies, the quiet reassessment of who mattered and who didn't. Victoria excused herself from the table without a word, her movements stiff and mechanical. Ashley followed moments later, her expression tight, with something between confusion and anger. I stayed seated, finishing my water, letting the weight of Richard's words settle over the room like fallout. Benjamin hadn't moved. He sat beside me, his dinner untouched, his eyes fixed on his plate, but his mind clearly racing. Finally, he spoke. "You save his firm?" I consulted. I said carefully, "That's all." "That's not all." Benjamin shot back, his voice low but intense. "That's not even close to all." "Who are you, Dad?" "Really?" Before I could answer, Victoria reappeared. Her face was composed now, but I could see the fury simmering behind her eyes. She leaned down, her voice a hiss meant only for me. "We need to talk. Now." I stood, excused myself from Benjamin, and followed her through the crowd. She didn't head toward the terrace or the lounge. Instead, she led me down a side hallway, away from the reception, into a small sitting room that smelled of lilies and furniture polish. The moment the door closed, she turned on me. "What was that?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "What did Richard Thornton just say up there?" "You heard him," I replied calmly. "I did some consulting work years ago." "Consulting?" Victoria's laugh was sharp, brittle. "You save his firm from collapse? In Zurich? You never told me you went to Zurich. You never asked." That stopped her cold. She stared at me, her carefully constructed composure beginning to fracture. "Don't you dare turn this around on me. You let me believe." She stopped, struggling to find the words. "You let everyone believe you were nobody, that you were just some retired, some what, Victoria?" I asked quietly. "Some disappointment, some burden you had to tolerate." Her face flushed. "That's not fair, isn't it?" I stepped closer, my voice still calm, but carrying an edge I rarely used. "You introduced me as retired for years. You made jokes about my suits. You told your friends I couldn't hold a job. Ashley learned to mock me from watching you." I didn't. She stopped again, and I could see the moment the reality hit her. All those casual dismissals, those little cuts, they'd accumulated into something she couldn't deny. "Give me your phone," she said suddenly. I raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? Your phone?" Her voice was rising, desperation creeping in. "Give it to me right now. I want to see who you've been talking to. What you've been hiding." I pulled my phone from my jacket pocket and unlocked it, handed it to her without hesitation. Her hands shook as she grabbed it, her fingers flying across the screen. She went straight to my email, scrolling frantically, and then she stopped. Her face went white, actually white, like someone had drained the blood from her body. Her breathing became shallow, rapid. "Why?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Why is the Federal Reserve Chairman emailing you? About a meeting next week?" I didn't answer immediately. Let her process it. Let her understand the magnitude of what she'd missed, what she dismissed. "What aren't you telling me?" She practically shouted it, her composure completely shattered. What the hell is going on, Bill? I took the phone back gently. I told you years ago, I did consulting work. I told you I traveled for negotiations. I told you I advised on financial matters. You just never cared enough to ask for details. This isn't details. She gestured wildly at the phone. This is who I've always been, I said quietly. You just preferred the version of me you created in your head, the one you could control, the one who made you feel superior. Victoria's face crumpled, but not with sadness. With rage. How dare you? I'm going back to the reception, I interrupted. You can join me when you've composed yourself. I walked out, leaving her standing there, my phone still clutched in her trembling hands. Behind me, I heard her sob, a sound somewhere between fury and devastation. But I didn't look back. I found Benjamin on the terrace, away from the noise and spectacle of the reception. He was leaning against the railing, staring out at the manicured gardens below, his bow tie loosened and his jacket draped over one arm. When he heard my footsteps, he didn't turn around. Is Mom okay? He asked, his voice flat. She will be, I said, come and stand beside him. Eventually. Benjamin laughed bitterly. That's not exactly reassuring, Dad. He finally looked at me, his expression caught somewhere between admiration and resentment. You saved Richard Thornton's firm in 2011. You work with the Federal Reserve. Well, don't I know? Quite a bit, I admitted. There was no point in softening it now. The dam had broken. But some of it you'll find out soon enough. What does that mean? I pulled an envelope from my inside jacket pocket. I've been carrying it for 3 years, waiting for the right moment. Or maybe the inevitable moment. This is for you, I said, handing it to him. Benjamin took it carefully, like it might explode. He opened it slowly, pulling out the single page inside. His eyes scanned the text once, then again, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. His voice failed him. He had to clear his throat and try again. This is a trust fund document, with my name on it. Keep reading, I said quietly. He did, and I watched the exact moment the number registered. His hand started shaking. $50 million, he whispered. You set up a trust fund for me worth $50 million. 15 years ago, I confirmed. When you were 11. There's one for each of you. Ashley, Sophie, Michael. Same amount. Same conditions. Benjamin's legs seemed to give out. He sat down hard on one of the terrace chairs, still clutching the document. Conditions. You get access when you turn 30, I explained. Or when you figure out who I really am before that. Whichever comes first. The trust specifies that the beneficiary must demonstrate knowledge of my actual career and contributions. Not the sanitized version your mother created. Ashley's 29, Benjamin said slowly, processing. She turns 30 next year. February, I confirmed. She would have gotten access automatically. But now, I gestured vaguely toward the reception hall, where the fallout was still unfolding. Now she knows, which means the condition is met early. Benjamin looked up at me, his eyes wet. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think that I was nobody? I finished. Because I want to see who you'd become without my influence. Without my name opening doors or closing them. I wanted you to build your own foundation. And Benjamin's voice was challenging now. What did you learn? I sat down beside him. I learned that you're the only one who ever defended me. The only one who asked questions instead of accepting your mother's narrative. The only one who looked at me and saw potential instead of disappointment. Benjamin's face crumbled. He put his head in his hands, and his shoulders shook with silent sobs. I put my hand on his back, and we sat there in silence while he processed what this meant. Not just the money, though that was staggering, but the validation, the proof that I'd been watching, that I'd seen him when he thought nobody had. What about Ashley and Sophie? He finally asked, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Are you telling them to? Eventually, I said, but they need to understand what they lost first. What they threw away by choosing cruelty over curiosity. Benjamin nodded slowly. And Michael? Michael gets his chance, I said. He's 15. He has time to decide what kind of man he wants to be. Tonight might be the moment that shapes that decision. We sat in silence for a while longer. Inside, I could hear music starting up again, the DJ trying to salvage the reception's energy. But out here in the cool evening air, my son and I had found something that had been missing for years. Understanding. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of real trust. Dad, Benjamin said quietly. Thank you. Not for the money. For believing I could figure it out. I squeezed his shoulder. You were always the smart one, Ben. I just gave you a reason to prove it. I returned to the reception to find it transformed into something brittle and strange. The energy had shifted from celebration to speculation. Guests clustered in small groups, whispering behind champagne flutes, their eyes darting toward the head table where Victoria sat alone, her face a mask of forced composure. Ashley had disappeared, probably locked in some bathroom with her bridesmaids, trying to process the implosion of her wedding day narrative. I made my way to the bar, and that's when I saw him, standing near the dessert table, looking distinctly uncomfortable in a suit that was trying too hard. Late 40s, salon-tanned, hairstyle with too much product. I recognized him from Victoria's phone, from the background of photos she'd posted on social media. Her business partner, the man she'd introduced at various charity events as someone helping her expand her foundation work. His name was Derek Callahan, and he was the reason Victoria had been so eager to paint me as a failure. Because if I was nobody, if I was forgettable and disappointing, then her affair was justified. It was an upgrade, a reasonable response to being stuck with a man who couldn't provide the status she craved. Derek saw me looking and had the decency to appear nervous. He set down his cake plate and started moving toward the exit, but I intercepted him smoothly, blocking his path with nothing more threatening than my presence. Mr. Callahan, I said pleasantly. Enjoying the wedding? He swallowed hard. Mr. Harrison. Yes, it's lovely. Beautiful ceremony. It was, I agreed. Though I imagine you're finding the reception a bit awkward. His face flushed. I'm not sure what you mean. Of course you don't, I said, my voice never losing its pleasant tone. Tell me, how long have you been sleeping with my wife? 2 years. 3. Derek's face went from flushed to pale. He glanced around frantically, checking if anyone was close enough to hear. I don't know what Victoria told you, but Victoria didn't tell me anything. I interrupted smoothly. She didn't have to. I've known for 3 years. Since the weekend, she claimed to be at that conference in Miami, but was actually at your condo in Fort Lauderdale. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. If you knew, why didn't you? Why didn't I confront her? I finished. Because I was curious to see how far she'd go. What story she'd create to justify it. And she didn't disappoint. She painted me as disabled, as retired, as useless. She made herself the martyr, staying with a man who couldn't provide. And you ate it up, didn't you? Derek said nothing. His silence was confirmation enough. Here's what's going to happen. I continued, my voice still calm, still pleasant. You're going to leave this reception. Tonight. Right now. You're going to drive back to whatever hole you crawled out of. And you're going to cease all contact with Victoria. No calls, no texts, no accidental meetings at charity brunches. You can't, Derek started, but I held up a hand. I absolutely can, I said. Because here's what you don't know, Mr. Callahan. That foundation Victoria works for, the one she's so proud of being on the board of, it's funded through a network of holding companies. And those holding companies trace back to a trust one established 20 years ago. The color drained from his face completely now. I've already made a phone call, I continued. By Monday morning, Victoria will receive notice that her position on the board has been terminated. Budget restructuring, they'll call it. Unfortunate, but necessary. And you? You'll be toxic by association. No other charity in Greenwich will touch either of you. Derek struggled to find words. That's cruel. No, I corrected, my voice finally carrying an edge. Cruel is letting my wife believe I was nobody, while she paraded you around as her escape route. Cruel is teaching my daughters that their father was a disappointment. Cruel is the empire of small humiliations she built over 15 years. I gestured vaguely between us. This is just consequences. Derek opened his mouth, thought better of it, and closed it again. He nodded once, a jerky motion that looked painful, and left without another word. I watched him disappear through the exit, then return to my table. Victoria was watching me from across the room, her eyes red-rimmed, but sharp with calculation. She'd seen me talking to Derek. She knew what it meant. And for the first time in our marriage, I saw fear in her expression. Good. She should be afraid. Because everything she'd built on the foundation of my supposed inadequacy was about to collapse. And unlike her, I wasn't going to cushion the fall. The first photo appeared on social media 40 minutes after Richard Thornton's toast. Someone had captured me, standing alone near the terrace doors, the platinum tie clip visible in the camera zoom. The caption read, "Mystery Man at Greenwich Wedding. Anyone recognize him?" By the time dessert was served, that photo had been shared 300 times. Financial bloggers had picked it up. Someone cross-referenced it with archived footage from a 2010 G20 summit in Seoul. The comments section exploded with speculation. That's the consultant who advised on the Greek restructuring. Holy hell. I thought he died in 2016. My boss met him once. Said he was the scariest person in any negotiation. He's just standing there in an old suit. Doesn't look scary to me. That's the point. Real power doesn't need to announce itself. I watched it unfold in real time from my phone, sitting at the family table while Victoria pretended to chat with guests and Ashley hid in the bathroom. Benjamin sat beside me, also scrolling through his phone, his expression cycling between amusement and disbelief. "Dad," he said quietly, showing me his screen. Financial Times just published an article. "The ghost of international finance surfaces at Connecticut wedding." It's already trending. I glanced at the article. They dug up my old consulting firm's website, archived photos from conferences I'd spoken at under assumed names, quotes from anonymous sources about my work during the 2008 financial crisis. Nothing concrete enough to be legally problematic, but enough to paint a picture that Victoria could no longer deny. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I hadn't seen in years. "Heard you came out of retirement at a wedding. Bold move. Call me when you're ready to discuss Jakarta. HK. Henrik Carlson, Swedish finance minister. We'd worked together during the Eurozone debt crisis. I'd forgotten he had my personal number." Another buzz. "Mr. Harrison, this is Douglas Chun from Goldman Sachs. We'd like to schedule a meeting regarding advisory work. Please contact me at your earliest convenience." Another. "Bill, it's Patricia Reeves from the Treasury. The secretary would like a word." Benjamin was watching the notifications pop up on my phone with wide eyes. "Dad, that's the U.S. Treasury. The actual Treasury Department." "I know," I said calmly, silencing my phone. "Aren't you going to respond?" "Later," I replied. "Right now, I'm watching your mother realize what she threw away." Victoria had finally checked her phone. I watched her face drain of color as she scrolled through social media, seeing the same articles, the same photos, the same commentary that was reshaping her entire understanding of the man she'd married. Her hands trembled so badly, she nearly dropped her phone. Sophie appeared then, my youngest daughter, her face flushed with what I first thought was embarrassment, but quickly realized was fury. She marched straight to our table, her boyfriend trailing nervously behind her. "Is it true?" Sophie demanded, her voice loud enough to turn heads. "Are you actually some kind of financial genius who worked with governments?" "I consulted on sovereign debt matters," I said carefully. "Yes. And you let us think you were nobody." Her voice broke on the last word. "You let Mom tell everyone you were retired on disability? That you couldn't work? I'll let your mother create whatever narrative made her comfortable." I corrected. "I never confirmed her stories. Neither did any of you ask me to." Sophie's boyfriend, the senator's son, spoke up then. His voice was quiet but strained. "Mr. Harrison, my father just called me. He said to tell you he remembers Geneva in 2014, and that he hopes there are no hard feelings about the appropriations vote." I raised an eyebrow. "Your father is Senator William Fletcher." "Yes, sir. Tell him I appreciated his honesty at the time," I said, even if I disagreed with his position. "Hard feelings are for people who can't separate policy from personal." The young man nodded, looking relieved, and pulled out his phone to text his father. Sophie stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "Geneva," she whispered. "You were in Geneva advising senators." "Among other people," I confirmed. Michael appeared then, my 15-year-old son, his face red and blotchy like he'd been crying. He walked straight to me and wrapped his arms around my shoulders from behind, pressing his face against my back. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said, his voice muffled. "I'm so sorry I said I was embarrassed by you. I didn't know. I didn't understand." I reached back and squeezed his arm. "You're 15, Michael. You're supposed to be embarrassed by your parents. That's the job description." "But I was mean about it," he insisted, pulling away to face me. "I told kids at school you were a loser, that you couldn't hold a job. I believed Mom when she said." He stopped, unable to finish. Your mother believed what she needed to believe, I said gently. And you trusted her. That's not a crime, son. It's loyalty. Misplaced, maybe, but loyalty nonetheless. Michael nodded, wiping his eyes. Benjamin put an arm around his younger brother's shoulders, and they stood together, the three of us forming a small island of understanding in the chaos of the reception. Across the room, Victoria was on her phone now, frantically calling someone. Probably Derek, though she'd find that line disconnected soon enough. Ashley had emerged from the bathroom, her makeup repaired, but her eyes hollow. She caught my gaze and looked away quickly, shame written across her features. The viral truth had spread faster than wildfire, and there was no containing it now. The call came at 7 the next morning. I was sitting in my home office, coffee in hand, reviewing emails from contacts I hadn't heard from in years. Victoria was still asleep, or pretending to be. Benjamin had spent the night in his old room, unwilling to leave given the circumstances. Mr. Harrison? The voice was professional but tight with urgency. This is Agent Melissa Torres with the FBI. We need you to come to your son Michael's school immediately. There's been a situation. My blood went cold. What kind of situation? A credible threat, sir. We believe someone attempted to abduct your son this morning on his way to class. School security intervened. Michael is safe, but we need to speak with you. I was out the door in under 3 minutes. Benjamin insisted on coming with me. We drove to Whitmore Academy in silence, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The school's parking lot was filled with police vehicles and 2 black SUVs that screamed federal agents. Agent Torres met us at the entrance. She was maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Mr. Harrison, your son is unharmed. He's with our counselor right now, but he's been asking for you. What happened? My voice was steady, but my hands were clenched in a fist. 2 men approached Michael near the north entrance around 6:45 this morning. She explained as we walked through the hallways. They claimed to be friends of yours, said you'd sent them to pick him up. Michael didn't recognize them and tried to walk away. They grabbed his arm. That's when school security intervened and called us. Who were they? Benjamin asked. We're working on identification, Torres said. But based on preliminary investigation, we believe this was a targeted attempt. Someone found out about your father's resurfacing, let's call it, and thought they could use Michael as leverage. We reached the counselor's office. Michael sat on a couch, looking small and frightened, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders despite the warm morning. When he saw me, he stood up and crossed the room in 3 steps, burying his face in my chest. Dad, he said, his voice muffled. They said they knew you. They said you'd want me to go with them. I held him tight, fury burning through my veins like acid. You did exactly right, son. Never go with anyone unless you hear it directly from me. Not even if they claim to know me. Agent Torres waited until Michael had calmed down before continuing. Mr. Harrison, we need to discuss security measures. Given your profile and the attention from yesterday's wedding, we're recommending immediate protective detail for all family members. I'll handle it, I said. Sir, with all respect, this requires professional. I said I'll handle it. I repeated, my tone leaving no room for argument. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd kept for emergencies. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Stone Security Solutions. Marcus, it's Bill Harrison. I need a team. Priority Alpha. There was a pause. Bill? Jesus. I heard you were dead. How many people? 5. Wife for kids. Full detail. 24/7. Start immediately. Cost is. I don't care about cost. I interrupted. I need the best. Send Cameron's team. Cameron himself? Yes. Done. They'll be there in 4 hours. Bill, what the hell happened? I'll explain later. Just get them here. I hung up and looked at Agent Torres. Cameron Stone runs a private security firm that protects heads of state and billionaires. His team will be here by noon. They'll coordinate with your people. Torres looked impressed despite herself. That's not a cheap solution. My son's life isn't negotiable, I said flatly. Benjamin was on his own phone now, texting rapidly. Dad, I'm telling Sophie and Ashley to stay put wherever they are. Not to go anywhere alone. Good, I approved. Victoria too. Whether she wants it or not. Michael looked up at me, his eyes red. Dad, is this because of what happened at the wedding? Because people found out about you? Yes, I said honestly. There was no point in lying. Some people think they can use you to get to me. They're wrong. But we're going to make sure you're protected until they understand that. I'm scared, Michael admitted. That's smart, I told him. Fear keeps you alert. But you're not alone. You've got me, Benjamin, and in a few hours, you'll have Cameron's team. They're former Navy SEALs and Secret Service. Nobody's getting near you again. Michael nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Agent Torres handed me her card. We'll want to interview you about anyone who might have a grudge or motive. Given your history, it's a long list, I said grimly. I'll have my assistant compile it and send it over. You have an assistant? I'm coming out of retirement, I said. Apparently, I don't have a choice anymore. Victoria filed for divorce 3 weeks after Ashley's wedding. Her lawyer, not Derek Callahan, delivered the papers to my office with trembling hands. I signed them without reading the terms, then handed them back with a single addition, a counter-proposal that outlined exactly what she'd be walking away with. Nothing. The prenuptial agreement we'd signed 31 years ago was ironclad. I'd written it myself, with language that would make a Supreme Court justice weep with admiration. Every asset, every account, every property was held in trust she had no claim to. The house in Greenwich, mine, purchased through a shell corporation 15 years before we moved in. Her foundation position, gone as I promised. Her social circle, evaporating as word spread about who she'd really been married to and how badly she'd miscalculated. Benjamin sat across from me in my home office, reviewing the divorce documents with the careful attention he'd learned at Sterling Financial. Dad, she's going to end up with basically nothing. Just the car and whatever's in her personal accounts. That's what happens when you build your life on someone else's perceived weakness, I said, not looking up from my laptop where emails continue to flood in. Job offers, consultation requests, invitations to speak at conferences I'd avoided for years. Don't you feel bad? Benjamin asked. Even a little. I looked at him then, really looked at him. She spent 15 years telling people I was disabled, that I couldn't work, that she was the only thing holding this family together financially. She had an affair with a man who thought he was her ticket to a better life. She taught your sisters to be ashamed of me. Should I feel bad that reality finally caught up with her? Benjamin shook his head slowly. No, I guess not. Ashley had moved back home, her marriage annulled by mutual agreement after Richard Thornton made it clear that continuing would damage his business relationships. She spent most of her time in her old room, rarely emerging except for meals. The trust fund documents sat unsigned on her desk. She hadn't earned them yet, and I wasn't going to push. Sophie had broken up with the senator's son the week after the wedding. He'd wanted to maintain the relationship, especially after his father pulled him aside and explained exactly who I was. But Sophie couldn't handle the cognitive dissonance of respecting me, now after years of contempt. She'd gone back to Harvard Law early, throwing herself into her studies with an intensity that worried me. Michael had become a different person. He wore his security detail like a badge of honor at school, and his grades had improved dramatically. He'd started asking me questions about my work, real questions, thoughtful ones. Last week, he'd asked if he could shadow me during a conference call with the Malaysian finance ministry. I'd said yes. What happens now? Benjamin asked, bringing me back to the present. Now I go back to work, I said simply. Real work. The kind I'm good at. The kind that matters. And Mom, your mother will figure out her own path, I said. She's resourceful when she wants to be. She just chose to direct that resourcefulness toward maintaining a fantasy instead of understanding reality. Benjamin stood, preparing to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, Dad, I'm proud of you. Not for the money or the influence or any of that. I'm proud that you never let her break you. That you stayed who you were even when everyone told you that you were nobody. I felt something tighten in my chest. Thank you, Ben. That means more than you know. After he left, I returned to my emails. There was one from Richard Thornton, thanking me again for my presence at the wedding and asking if I'd consider joining his advisory board. Another from Henrik Carlson, confirming our meeting in Geneva next month. A third from Cameron, updating me on Michael's security detail and recommending we maintain protection for at least another 6 months. And at the bottom, one for Victoria's lawyer. A single line. Client wishes to withdraw divorce petition and discuss reconciliation. I deleted it without responding. Some bridges, once burned, aren't worth rebuilding. especially when they were built on quicksand to begin with. 8 months later, I stood in my new office in Manhattan, 30 floors above the city, watching the sun set over the Hudson River. The nameplate on my desk read, William Harrison, Senior Advisor, Global Financial Strategy. Simple, accurate, no embellishment needed. Benjamin had joined my firm 3 months ago, bringing with him a sharp analytical mind and a work ethic that impressed even the most senior partners. He'd proven himself worthy of the trust fund, not through birth, but through merit. The $50 million sat in his account now, untouched. He didn't need it. He was making his own way. Michael had started a new school, one with better security and a more rigorous academic program. His bodyguards had become mentors, teaching him discipline and awareness. Last month, he told me he wanted to study international relations. Like you, Dad, he'd said, but maybe with less secrecy. I'd laughed at that. Less secrecy is definitely healthier. Ashley had finally emerged from her depression. She'd gotten a job at a nonprofit, real work for modest pay, learning what it meant to build something on her own foundation rather than borrowed status. The trust fund documents remained unsigned on her desk. She'd told me she wanted to earn them properly, not through birthright, but through understanding. I'd respected that. Sophie had transferred from Harvard to Georgetown, closer to the political world she wanted to understand. She called me once a week now, asking questions about policy and strategy. The conversations were still awkward, still weighted with unspoken apologies, but they were happening. That was progress. Victoria had moved to her sister's house in California. We spoke once, briefly, to finalize the divorce. She'd asked if I hated her. I told her the truth. I didn't hate her, but I didn't recognize her either. The woman I'd married had been buried under years of resentment and ambition until nothing authentic remained. She cried during that conversation, asked if there was any way back. I'd said no. Some endings are final, not because of cruelty, but because the foundation was flawed from the beginning. My phone buzzed. A text from Benjamin. Jakarta meeting confirmed. They're ready to proceed with your recommendation. This is going to work, Dad. I smiled and typed back. It usually does when you trust the process. Another text, this one from Michael. Got an A on my economics paper. Mr. Patterson said, I have a natural understanding of market dynamics. Wonder where I got that from. I sent back a thumbs up and a proud face emoji, something that would have been unthinkable a year ago when I was too busy being invisible to participate in my children's lives. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the city in shades of purple and gold. I thought about the man I'd been at Ashley's wedding, standing in the background wearing an old suit and a tie clip no one was supposed to recognize. I thought about Victoria's contempt, Ashley's mockery, the years of quiet dismissal that had accumulated like interest on a debt I'd never agreed to pay. And then I thought about now, about Benjamin working 2 floors down, brilliant and driven, about Michael finding his path, about Ashley learning humility, about Sophie rebuilding her understanding of strength. The past was finished. The future was unwritten. And for the first time in 15 years, I was exactly where I belonged, visible, valued, and free from the burden of other people's limited imaginations. I turned away from the window and returned to my desk. There was work to do, real work, the kind that changed economies and prevented crises and reminded the world that true power never needs to announce itself. It just needs to show up and do the job.